Good evening. The world is in mourning following the death of Queen Elizabeth II. Welcome to this special edition of 9 News.
Her Majesty died at her home in the Scottish Highlands, aged 96, ending an extraordinary 70-year reign.
Her passing has triggered an outpouring of grief for the loss of a mother and a monarch, a woman universally admired who devoted her life to duty.
But amid the sorrow, treasured memories of her stoic leadership, the lives she changed and her cherished visits to Melbourne and Victoria.
Tonight we look back on an unforgettable moment in history.
But also to the future as King Charles III ascends the throne. Mark Burrows begins our coverage.
Doing her duty until the end. The Queen, frail, 2 days ago at Balmoral, Scotland. It was to be the final photo, greeting the new Prime Minister. Then last night, suddenly, the grim indication from the palace she was fading.
The Queen is under medical supervision at Balmoral after doctors became concerned for her health.
By chance, Charles, Camilla and Princess Anne were already in Scotland and raced to her bedside. Prince William at the wheel with the Queen's sons, Edward and Andrew, arrived just after she died. And Harry also missed the chance to say his final goodbye. The Duchess of Cambridge stayed in London to tell the children about their great-grandmother in person.
A few moments ago, Buckingham Palace announced the death of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. The Palace has just issued this statement. It says the Queen died peacefully at Balmoral this afternoon.
Back in London, the death notice posted on the gates of Buckingham Palace. It read simply, "The Queen died peacefully." The moment a country knew was near, that still tore into the hearts of millions. An estimated 60 million in the UK alone have never known life without her.
It's just a sad day for us all today. And we've all known just one Queen. She's the person we've always looked up to somehow. It's just a sad day. Just a very, very sad day.
My mum called me earlier. She was crying on the phone because the Queen has been a huge part of her life and everyone's life. We've all grown up with her, so yeah, very sad indeed.
Never been a royalist, so I don't know why I've been so affected by it. I literally only found out a few minutes ago, and before it happened, I didn't think I would be, but I really am, and I realised just how important she was.
70 years important, the longest reign of any monarch, the greatest figure in modern British history. She saw them all. 13 US presidents, 16 Australian prime ministers, 15 UK PMs.
I have had quite a lot of prime ministers, starting with Winston, and some stayed longer than others.
And on her death, multiplying by the hour, thousands outside the palace with an anthem. Her anthem.
Queen Elizabeth II was the rock on which modern Britain was built. Our country has grown and flourished under her reign. Britain is the great country it is today because of her.
And the wave of sadness reaching Australia, a country she visited an astounding 16 times.
This is a loss we feel deeply in Australia. Queen Elizabeth II is the only reigning monarch most of us have known, and the only one to ever visit Australia. And over the course of a remarkable 7 decades, Her Majesty was a rare and reassuring constant amidst rapid change. Through the noise and turbulence of the years, she embodied and exhibited a timeless decency and an enduring calm. Her Majesty served our nation and the Commonwealth for 70 years.
The moment the Queen died, the longest-serving heir apparent assumed the throne, and it sounded almost strange. His Majesty, King Charles III. In a statement he said, "We mourn profoundly the passing of a cherished sovereign and a much-loved mother. I know her loss will be deeply felt throughout the country, the realms and the Commonwealth, and by countless people around the world. During this period of mourning and change, my family and I will be comforted and sustained by our knowledge of the respect and deep affection in which the Queen was so widely held." And that affection hung heavy as the crowd did its best to embrace a new chapter in British history. The Queen was dead. Long live the King.
Long to reign over us, God save the King.
Charles's reign will pale in comparison. Even as a young 21-year-old, her destiny was sealed.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong.
She found her love in a naval lieutenant, Philip Mountbatten, in 1947.
Again and again the people called for Elizabeth and Philip. Again and again they joyfully responded.
And then with the death of her father, King George VI.
And now here comes Her Majesty.
The Queen's coronation, televised for the first time. The beginning of a remarkable reign no one could have predicted. The first British monarch to celebrate a platinum jubilee, 70 years, which he was able to enjoy from the palace balcony. She had become the nation's grandmother, reassuring them in the middle of the pandemic.
We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again.
A year later, she cut a lonely figure at the funeral for her husband. Now, they will be together again when she is buried at St George's Chapel at Windsor. She will be remembered as one of the nation's greatest sovereigns, visiting 117 countries on 261 official visits. And no matter where she was, she started every day reading the government papers in the famous red boxes. Those years of service applauded by the crowds outside Buckingham Palace. The Queen's last days at Balmoral Castle in the Scottish moors north of Edinburgh would have been a comfort. It's where she chose to spend her summer breaks with the family, away from palace splendour and public attention. Just a few hours ago, attention caught up with Balmoral. Flowers lining the entranceway to the old castle where the Queen now rests. Britain will now plunge into 10 days of mourning for one glorious life. Mark Burrows, 9 News.
Well, she was born between 2 world wars and died at the end of an unprecedented pandemic. In her 96 years, she'd pretty much seen and survived it all.
And through it all, there was one constant, her steadying hand in the most turbulent of times. Carrie-Anne Greenbank reports.
She was in some ways the accidental queen by a twist of history. Crowned in one of the great and solemn early moments of global television. Yet who, for the next 70 years, would never stop surprising us.
Good evening, Mr. Bond.
Elizabeth's coronation would be a moment of splendour with all the pageantry London could muster, reviving post-war Britain. Elizabeth's destiny was brought about by an upheaval within the royal family.
But you must believe me when I tell you that I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love.
The abdication of her uncle made Elizabeth's father the new king, George VI, and it made Elizabeth heir to the throne. The training began. Lessons in constitutional history, a French tutor, a special unit of the Girl Guides at Buckingham Palace so she would have company her own age. There was a happy family environment alongside Sister Margaret, but Europe was plunging into war. Children evacuated from London. Elizabeth spoke to them.
My sister Margaret Rose and I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all.
In the darkest days, with the palace bombed, she would join the army as a mechanic and truck driver. She had met as a teenager a young naval officer, Philip Mountbatten. They married in 1947. In a sign of solidarity with so many others, her wedding gown was paid for with clothing ration coupons. It was during a visit to Kenya in 1952 she learned of her father's death and her ascension to the throne.
When the Archbishop gently sets this splendid emblem on the Queen's head.
Alongside her 4 children, Elizabeth would gradually dismantle some of the strict royal protocols and was seen by many as more of a middle-class mum than a distant figurehead. Australian leaders who met the Queen over the years today reflected on her dedication to duty and the warmth she radiated.
She was my Queen for my entire life. I think of Her Majesty's dignity and her compassion.
She had a great sense of humour. She had what seemed to me to be a deep curiosity about Australia. She understood different features of Australian life.
And then with a flash of the wrist, a button was pushed and this stampede of corgis arrived in the dining room and almost wrecked the place.
She was the sovereign, she was our monarch, she was Her Majesty, but at the same time, in her presence, she made you feel just very warm and very welcome.
As a symbol of continuity and stability, it calls us to higher things, and that's really what Her Majesty the Queen did.
There was also her lifelong love affair with some hairy little friends, her corgis. It lasted from childhood to her final years. While England would be headquarters of what was dubbed the Firm, the 4 corners of the Commonwealth would be the Queen's home away from home. Those early years as monarch saw her constantly on the move. The Pacific nations, Canada, the United States, Cyprus, India, Pakistan, Nepal. All that time, she was also carrying out the great ceremonies of the British Crown, opening Parliament.
My government will use the opportunity of a strengthening economy,
hosting visiting heads of state and presiding over the military ceremonies that are at the very heartbeat of England. And if the Queen seemed a merely symbolic commander-in-chief, she showed she had steely nerves nonetheless.
Field Marshal His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Colonel of the Grenadier Guards.
In 1981, as she took part in Trooping the Colour, a man in the crowd fired 6 blank shots as the procession passed. Unflappable, Elizabeth comforted her horse, Burmese.
Her Majesty the Queen, but he's a very experienced, wise old fellow.
The Queen never even glanced in the direction of the shots as the man was arrested. Life had other hurdles, however, the death of her sister Margaret and the mother she adored, universally known as the Queen Mum.
Ever since my beloved mother died over a week ago, I have been deeply moved by the outpouring of affection which has accompanied her death.
And her sometimes wayward children had her patching and mending the royal image. The saga of Sarah Ferguson, Anne's divorce, Andrew's fall from grace, Harry and Meghan's departure to California.
Goodbye, England's rose.
Perhaps the worst moment, Diana's death, the Queen needing to repair a broken bridge with the public.
First, I want to pay tribute to Diana myself. She was an exceptional and gifted human being.
But Britain could not hold a grudge against the woman who had served them for so long, through thick and thin. Her decades on the throne were celebrated. 50 years, grandeur on one hand, with wonderful English whimsy on the other, street parties. 60 years, a convoy on the Thames and a concert. And Charles at his goofy best.
Your Majesty, Mummy.
Underneath the crown and majestic robes beat a sometimes mischievous heart, a London Olympics stunt with Daniel Craig. And a recent meeting with Paddington Bear, a moment of marmalade magic.
Tea? Oh, yes, please. You would like a marmalade sandwich? I always keep one for emergencies.
So do I. I keep mine in here.
She enjoyed a garden stroll with Sir David Attenborough.
I was going to say, a sundial neatly planted in the shade.
Isn't it good? Yes.
Yeah.
Had we thought of that?
And there was a strange encounter as she walked the fields of Balmoral with her security guard.
And it was two Americans on a walking holiday. And it was clear from the moment that we first stopped, they hadn't recognised the Queen. He said to Her Majesty, "And where do you live?" And she said, "Well, I live in London, but I've got a holiday home just the other side of the hills." And before I could see what was happening, he gets his camera, gives it to the Queen and says, "Can you take a picture of the two of us?"
At 96, no surprise to realise she would not be with us forever, except perhaps in spirit. In Balmoral, Scotland, Carrie-Anne Greenbank, 9 News.
And Carrie-Anne joins us now from Balmoral in Scotland. Carrie, tributes are growing there.
Well, Pete, they are, but it's a much quieter scene here. There's a noticeable police presence because, of course, members of the royal family are right behind these gates here. For King Charles III and Camilla, this has been a moment of private grief, perhaps the only moment they're going to get for quite a while, because the new king and his queen consort are today travelling from Balmoral Castle down to London for what is going to be a momentous 10 days of history in the making. Now, just a short time ago, we saw two vehicles leaving Balmoral Castle. These are vehicles typical with what the royal family use, and photographers here say that they believe Prince Harry was in the back seat. But for the Scottish people here, their moment to grieve will be coming in the next few days when the Queen's body, her coffin, will be moved to Edinburgh. It'll be placed in St Giles Cathedral, and the Scottish people will really get their chance to pay their respects and say their goodbyes then, before the coffin makes its way to London. Pete?
Carrie-Anne Greenbank, thank you. And closer to home, Melburnians have been moved by the Queen's passing. Next in 9 News, tributes from our leaders and from ordinary Victorians.
And from trams to football, the monarch soaked up our city. We reflect on Her Majesty's many visits to Melbourne.